Welcome to Crossover Event. We're back. This week it's me, Chris, from oneofus.net, and joining me as always is my co-host,
Martin Thomas, who you'll normally see on Double Toasted.
And we are very pleased and honored to have our special guest, C. Robert Cargill here, who is not just a big deal all on his own, but is one of our oldest friends. We've worked with you for years on stuff until you got really, really big in Mr. Fancy Pants.
20 years.
2
years.
Two decades.
Literally, we are literally deep in 2 decades.
Yeah. But
and to say we're old friends, like you literally, after your divorce, you lived with me and my wife for 2.5 years. Like we are family. We're not just friends. We are family.
Yeah.
But the pandemic has kept us away. And this is literally the first time I've been in the same room with you guys for a couple of years. And
No. I have always counted on seeing you for your birthday for the big screening, which couldn't happen for the last 2 years.
He always used to have a screening at the Alamo Drafthouse where he'd be like, hey, I'm not going to tell you what I'm showing.
It's a midnight screening. Just show up at midnight. I'm going to show something because the Drafthouse, I've been a friend of the Drafthouse for a lot of years. I wrote about them back before, they were big. And so they've always considered me a friend, treated me like one. And like, hey, we'll give you a theater for your birthday and you can show anything out of the American Genre Film Archive, which has incredible deep cut stuff in. So every year they send me this list that grows longer and longer. And I haven't been able to do that for a few years, which is really sad. Last year, I was going to show Conan the Barbarian to prep for the 40th anniversary, which just happened. And like, hey, I know you guys all have this on DVD, but when was the last time you saw Conan in a theater with a bunch of friends? Let's do that. But it's not always good stuff. Sometimes it's delightfully terrible stuff.
Dude, it so often is, but my favorite was Can't Stop the Music.
Yes.
The origin of the Village People.
Yes.
That one and Escape Town, USA were my two favorites.
Those are my two
Me
favorites
too.
as well. Like, because the audience really got into it. Like, you slipped in and sat next to me at Skate Town USA, and you're like, hey man, I love you, but I'm gonna nope out early of this. And then you saw what I was showing, and you were like, oh, I'm staying to the end. and I was so glad because you were the one person in the audience that like knew all the comics that were showing up as walk-ons in this movie. And you're like, oh, it's the unknown comic. Oh, it's the actual guy who plays the unknown comic also in
Murray
this movie.
Langston,
And like that nobody else in the audience was getting what was going on. And so, occasionally people would be like, is that the guy from Just the 10 of Us? And it's like, yes, but he was a stand-up comic before that.
Because there was a show called Make Me Laugh. It was a syndicated show that had comics on, and it was something that fueled the comedy boom of the 90s. And everybody in that, all the comics in that, were regulars on that show.
Yeah.
And I was in high school watching all those. So it was super exciting for me.
It was fun. The other one that's one of my favorites is we showed the American cut of Phenomena known as Creepers, the Argento movie, which it's the 82-minute cut, which is perfect for midnight.
Sure.
But like literally it ends, it has this get on your feet like what the fuck ending where which resolves one of the greatest revenge subplots in the history of horror cinema.
And that was Jennifer Connelly's first movie.
First feature. First lead in a feature, because a year before that, she was in Once Upon a Time in America.
Okay.
But yes, it's her first lead, and she never talks about it.
Nope.
She hates having been in that movie for a myriad of, I'm guessing, abuses that happened on set of trying to make a horror movie in Italy in the 80s with a director who is famously on heroin at the time. Oh yeah. So when the orangutan with a razor blade shows up in the movie with Donald Pleasance teaching Jennifer Connelly to use her psychic powers to control bugs, you go, hey, this movie's a little weird.
So instead of Irma Vep, they should be doing an HBO series on that.
Right?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
When you showed Can't Stop the Music, I was there with my wife, and I was like, man, this is so much fun. I love this type of thing. And she's like, really? Have you ever seen The Apple? We literally went home and stayed up till sunup to watch The Apple.
Oh, The Apple's so great. I've thought about playing it because it's in AGFA. They have a print.
So great. Yeah. But anyway, so he does have a movie out.
I do.
It's called The Black Phone. It stars Ethan Hawke. Well, Martin and I were talking about this last week when we were done. We're like, it's like you're watching a sequel to Dazed and Confused, and all of a sudden a horror movie breaks in.
Which, honestly, I don't like a lot of horror movies, but the ones I do like are the ones that start off like, hey, it's a real movie. Like Midsommar. It's not about anything horrific until it is.
Yeah.
And then I'm completely immersed in it. And The Black Phone was one of those.
Well, thank you,
I give you high praise for what you did by bringing those characters to life. As a matter of fact, when I got out of the movie, I immediately looked up Scott Derrickson just to see when he was born, because he captured the late 70s so much better than any other movie I've ever seen.
It was literally the point of the movie. Scott pitched me an idea. He had been going through therapy and had really been digging into his childhood and how deeply messed up his childhood was.
Sure.
And he was like, man, would you want to make a movie with me about my childhood living in North Denver? Like, we could shoot it on 16 millimeter for $500,000 in a basement somewhere. Like, just shoot this low budget thing, but I just got to get this thing out of me. And I was like, yeah, I would. And then we started kicking ideas back and forth and mentioned the fact that we had been circling Joe Hill's The Black Phone for a while, which opens with the abduction and, of Finn and throwing him in the basement. And it's essentially opens in the second act of the movie. And my hesitation to it the whole time was, we have to create a whole first act. We have to create whole characters. We have to like really tinker with this thing. But when it was like, oh, what if we took everything about Scott's childhood and superimposed that onto the plot of The Black Phone? And once we had that, the script just poured out of us.
Wow.
But
that's fascinating to hear.
Several of those things that happened in the first act of the movie happened to Scott as a child.
Oh, boy.
That fight that happened out there, what really happened, Robin is an actual real guy. It's based on a very real guy that Scott grew up with and knew. And that whole line of when he's washing the blood off his hands and then taping it up with masking tape and saying, about you got to give something to the crowd, give him a little blood. That is straight out of Scott's memory. Like, that happened in middle school. Yeah. And Scott, wanted to put some of those things in cinema. And so we put them in a movie, and it really kind of, and just wove together a bunch of his memories into something that was palpable and narrative. And then all of a sudden we have this character of Finney, who is essentially Scott at that age.
Having grown up around that same time, I watched it in that first act. I was like, this is just being immersed in that world where you're like, this is real. This is really, really what it was like. And like, absolutely. I mean, even all the dark parts, but like, you're still like, if you had been watching all this and you didn't know you were watching a horror movie, you wouldn't think that you were going to be that it was going to get into where it was. So when it does go there, because I mean, even as a kid, I remember they were always like, because 70s rise of the serial killer, and
sure,
and so everyone was always talking about, oh shit, what if there's a serial killer around? Like, the media played on that a lot, so that was there. But then when it actually goes to, oh shit, this is happening, it's really scary.
Yeah, there's this scene where Jeremy Davies is spanking or / beating his daughter, and I initially was watching it through today's eyes, where it's just like, this is abuse, and then my other voice said, oh, this was what happened to you every day.
This was our
like,
childhood.
oh yeah, that's right.
I mean, that was the line that I was never able to fit in there, that when I mentioned it to people of our age who grew up with this stuff, was, go pick your belt.
Yes.
Or go pick a switch.
Pick a switch.
Like, when you say go pick a switch, I told that to a friend the other day. He goes, oh, my Alabama heart just puckered up.
Yeah. You just did that. You went like, oh my God,
I can feel it. Because if you picked a switch that was too small, you get in even worse trouble.
Yeah,
so you had to pick a juicy one. So you had to actually think about your punishment. Like, it was almost worse than the beating. Like, it's
all the anticipation.
Yeah.
Well, it was always the anticipation that was so much worse until you got the beating. It's like, no, the beating's actually worse. I'm sorry. I forgot what I said before.
Oh, dude, I got that call from my mom about 3 weeks ago, because 3 months ago, she was reading reviews from Fantastic Best and Beyond Fest. She was really excited about my movie. And she's like, so I don't know how to broach this, but I hear there's a beating scene with a spanking. Is that based on your childhood?
Oh boy.
And I was like, well, I mean, not in the context of that scene, no, but I mean, all of us got spanked growing up. So yeah, I'm sure we spanked you like maybe 2 or 3 times as a kid. And I was like, maybe a week. I was not the best kid, and you weren't the best parent. So let's just agree.
It's just like, look, it was a different time. I got it.
Well, that's what I told her.
I never would have called it abuse at the time.
No, of course not. No one did. It was just normal.
We knew what abuse. Like, Abyss was using a closed fist.
Yeah.
Or the belt buckle.
Or getting the belt for no reason.
Yeah.
That was abuse.
Yeah.
For us, it was, you just cracked a kid's head open at school, and I've gotten that criticism from people like, oh, those kids would have gotten suspended for that fighting, and it's like, did you live through the 70s and 80s? Because no, we fucking didn't. Like no, and like that kid had his head cracked open. Yeah, did that in a fight once. Yeah, that kid was at school the next day, had a Band-Aid on his face, looked the other way when we made eye contact. That happens.
It looks a lot worse when you get it because the scalp bleeds a lot.
It really does. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, no, I mean but it was very much about that time. So whenever anybody really feels that, you know, that they related to especially that first act of the movie and really like, oh my God, you captured the time, it means the world to us, because that was literally what we were trying to do.
To be clear, I want to say we're not defending like we should go back to these times. They were better. They were not.
They were not fun times, and that's the whole point. Like that's the other thing about the film is, you know, we depict racism, we depict homophobia, because we wanted to, every movie we watch about the 70s, like right down to something like, you know, Dazed and Confused, which I love, is like, weren't the 70s awesome? And we kind of sit there and go, not for everybody it wasn't.
No. When I watched Dazed and Confused, I didn't think it was awesome at all. I was only thinking like, okay, these are for people who are actually 10 years older than me. And man, they had it tough.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, Dazed and Confused for me was like, is 10 years before my graduation, but that was exactly what it was like, down to even the clothes people were wearing and the music they were listening to. Yeah. But anyway, I want to slide into the horror aspects of it. Now, we met originally because we were both big horror fans. And we met because you were working for Ain't It Cool News. We were working for a public access show called The Real Deal here in Austin. Multiple nominated for Best in Austin Real Deal.
Yes.
And we,
you know, that show,
we actually won a bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being on that show.
Yeah,
I remember there was this golden age of the show when you had this young ingenue on. Who,
you were sexy, that's for sure.
I was a good-looking, long-haired dude.
Hey, we were all kids back then.
we were chill. You were the old man.
I was the old man,
and you were like
at
35.
Yeah, about that. I was maybe a couple years younger.
I remember when you turned 40, and we relentlessly harangued you. And it's
right.
40 is such a nice age.
we did a couple years all together on that show, and then like the head of the show, Corey Coleman, said like, hey, I think I want to do an animation type thing, and then we all moved on to Spill.com, where we're animated characters. Producer, if you want to throw in a clip from Spill.com at this point, feel free. You know, I mean,
aren't you the guy that turned to me about 15 minutes in and said, I don't think I can take this anymore. And I said, you're going to walk out, and you go, I think I am. And you looked at me and I said, yeah, I'm not going to let this one beat me. And you said, wait, you still have never walked out of a film? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And you were like, fuck, now I have to stay. That was the conversation we had.
I cannot
15
lie.
minutes in.
I cannot lie. And it did indeed get worse from there.
We have the thing about Spill fans, I've said it numerous times, they're the greatest fans in the world.
Yeah.
I have not gone to a screening, I have not gone to a public appearance of anything that I don't have a Spill fan show up.
Oh, I believe it.
Scott has, one time, me, Scott, and his now wife, his girlfriend at the time, we were at a bar together, and he told that story. He's like, oh man, everywhere I go with this guy, somebody knows him not from his movies, not from Ain't It Cool News. They recognize him from Spill.com. And on our way out of the bar, somebody stops me with the back of their hand and goes, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but are you Carlisle? And Scott goes, I told you. I told you.
I just took another gig working somewhere with a bunch of much younger people under me as a manager. And there's this 21-year-old guy. I'm working with him, and he keeps staring at me. He looked like with his eyes like this. And I'm like, is there something wrong? And he goes, your voice is very familiar. And I was like,
Cyrus.
I know. And he's like, oh my God, you were on Spill. And just has a fanboy moment. And I was like, my first thing I said was, you were too young to be listening to Spill.
Oh, that happens all the time. There's somebody who has a confessional, and they're 27 now, but they're like, I was listening to you guys when I was 13 years old.
Like, you shouldn't have.
Well, yeah, you shouldn't have been.
The thing about that era that I've been reflecting on recently is I've been seeing a lot of stuff that's now going back and looking at that early era of YouTube and like 2006 through 2011 and what that iteration of YouTube was. And I remember at the time us being like, oh, yeah, we got 100,000 views on a video. That's all right. You know, it's not close to the views we're getting over on our website or anything like that, but I guess that's pretty good. And you look back at the time, people were like, and it got 50,000 views, and it was a huge thing. And it was like, oh shit, we'd actually kind of done some shit in that early Stone Age of YouTube.
We did. We were kind of way ahead of the grade of what was happening.
We all the time get people who are, phenomenally successful, going like, man, you guys were our inspiration.
Yeah.
You're the reason we got into
These
doing
guys
this.
who get 100 million hits.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
Like, yeah.
Well, but we're all famously successul now, right? I mean, we're all making movies and living
I knew this was going to happen.
Come on. One of us was going to bust the other balls first, and I'm surprised we got this far before you guys took me out.
Honestly, you have shown tremendous restraint.
I mean, I'm incredibly proud of you because when we were living together, you just would constantly write. He was like one of those guys like, well, it's 10 o'clock at night, time to make some coffee. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, yeah, I just write at night. And he would just write constantly. And I was like, I never, even at screenings, press screenings, he'd have this little tiny, like, sort of proto laptop thing with him where he was like typing away before the movie started. And I was like, God damn, he's working his ass off. And you know what? Everything you've got now, you worked for very hard and you earned it.
Well, not just that. Like, everybody knows you for Spill and your movies that you've written, especially the Marvel stuff. But man, you've written two of my favorite novels of all time.
Oh, thank you so much. Which two are your favorites?
Dreams and Shadows?
Yeah, thank you.
And Sea of Rust?
Yeah, thank you.
I know.
Sorry, I was blanking for a second.
I know.
Do you have the recent one?
I don't.
I was gonna I'm gonna bring him a copy of Day Zero, and he's like, oh, he's probably already got a copy of Day Zero.
No, I don't.
I will bring you a copy of Day Zero.
Please do.
I'm very proud of that book.
So now that we're off of like the past, I want to know about like your horror inspirations here for the Black Phone. Where does your love for horror even come from in the first place? When you're writing something like this, what are you drawing upon?
I mean, when I was 8 years old, that's when I realized I wanted to be a writer. And how that happened was I had a huge crush on Drew Barrymore. We're the exact same age. You know, I grew up with her. Like, even I stuck with her through the Coke years when she was 12. Which you're cracking up because that's literally Drew Barrymore's Coke years.
No, I know.
And when Poison Ivy came out, your mind was just blown.
That famous Playboy magazine where it was like, oh my God, like I've grown up. I've been in love with this girl since I was 8 years old, and now she's in Playboy. And, of course, my favorite part of that was Steven Spielberg bought her a sweater and sent it to her and said, I heard you were in a magazine and you looked cold. So, which I just thought.
Well, you weren't like, no, not my Drew. Don't share it with the world. That's for me.
No. Oh, no, I'm not that incel. Like, it's just you and me for eternity. No, it was very, but so, I really wanted to see her new movie that was coming out. My parents were like, we are not taking you to a Stephen King movie. And so my aunt bought me a copy of Firestarter. Mm-hmm. That was we were releasing this with the movie poster version. Mm-hmm. And my parents were like, why are you giving our son a copy of a Stephen King novel? She's like, he's 8. He's not going to read it. He's going to stare at the picture of the girl he has a crush on. And I read that cover to cover 3 times. And on the 3rd time through, I was like, this Stephen King guy, he gets to do this for a living. That's what I want to do. I want to write. I want to tell stories for a living. That sounds rad. And that always stuck with me no matter what, your childhood whims are like, oh, I want to be a marine biologist now and study sharks, or I want to be an astronomer and study, black holes. You're still like, but I want to write books about it. And so that always stuck with me. And then in middle school, I had a friend named Alex Miller who was that buddy who his parents would let him watch whatever. And so we would hang out. He was a guy who got me really into comic books. I liked comic books, but he's the one who's like, here, read this run of the X-Men. Here, you need to read, this run of Avengers. And so I would go over to his house on the weekends and we'd read comics. And then after his parents would go to bed, he'd be like, all right, we're watching Friday the 13th, 1 through 3 tonight. So we're going to go through these. And so he was educating me on all this stuff. I was that friend he got to share stuff with. And so I got this middle school education of all this great 80s horror. And then I went to high school and met someone very similar, whose name was Ryan, whose nickname was Ogre. He was 14 years old. He was 6'2" and 250 pounds.
Makes sense.
Everyone called him Ogre, and everybody thought he was an idiot. And I got to talking to him one day and found out he was a big horror nerd. He found out I was a horror nerd, so he's like, well, you got to come over and sleep over on Friday, and we're going to watch movies. And he's like, oh, you've never seen Day of the Dead? Let's watch Day of the Dead. So I got this next friend who was showing me all this great stuff that he had, and he was the guy who introduced me to Fangoria, and like, oh, you got to be reading this.
Yeah.
And
first thing I ever got published was a letter to Fangoria.
the character of Ogre shows up in homage in Black Phone. In that scene with Robin Ariano in the bathroom. That's a thing that literally happened to me as a kid, where I had some bully fucking with me, and Ogre walked in, saw the guy messing with me,
Okay.
literally slammed him against the wall and said, "This is my best friend Cargill. You fuck with him, you fuck with me." And the guy's like, "Oh, I was just messing with him, man." Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think you'd actually mess with my friend. I just wanted to let you know that if you did, and of
We
course,
would have problems.
and so I slipped that bit into that scene.
Okay.
Like a lot of in that scene, like the conversation they're having at the end of that scene is from Scott's childhood, but that whole small bit at the beginning with the interrupting the bullies, that literally happened to me, and that was my buddy Ryan, who also got me into horror. Or continued my horror education rather. And so I just had a bunch of great people in my life inserting horror into it, and just fell in love with it. So that by the time I was 16 years old, I was, going out and watching Warlock in a movie theater, and anything that was horror.
I saw that in the theater.
Yeah, Warlock's great. Tremors. That looks silly and fun. I'm in.
It's amazing.
So I watched all this horror in high school that I was going to. That my parents were like, "Well, he's already watching the stuff, so we may as well just buy the ticket for him." Because my parents were very much like, I had all these weird hobbies, but they were like, every time my mother would be like, aren't you worried about what our son's doing? And my dad's like, he's not shooting up with needles. He's not smoking out. He's not coming home drunk. Let's let him watch movies and read comic
the
books.
minute he's cutting up animals, I'll step in.
Yeah.
With a belt.
That's fantastic, man. Like everybody's story, especially horror nerds, is so like different and unique and based on very specific things that changed who they are. And a lot of horror nerds are the sweetest people you ever want to meet.
It's something Joe Hill said once that I quote a lot because it's the best thing I think anyone's ever said, and most of the things anyone's ever said about horror, which is horror isn't about extreme sadism, it's about extreme empathy. Mm-hmm. Like, horror works when you care about the character, so the more you care about the character, the more invested you are, the more you don't. One of the best reviews I read of Black Phone was somebody's like, it's a movie that you love the character so much you beg that there isn't action. You don't want the action to move forward because you want nothing to happen to that kid.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's, like I said, there's so many horror movies that I always think of myself as not being a horror fan, because most horror movies don't go with that. They have characters that you don't like, or they do things that go against just the human sense of self-preservation. And when I complain about this, people say, I know, but the kills are so great. I'm like, well, but yeah, that's fine, but I'm not invested in it.
There's two types of horror. There's empathy and there's catharsis. Mm-hmm. So you've got a horror film like Black Phone. You got a horror film like most of Stephen King's movies or books, where you care about these characters, and then horrible things happen to them and it makes you scared. Then you have movies where it's like, these people are awful, let's watch them die. And you love watching the bullies have terrible things happen to them. You love watching you love watching that group of just awful people that are every awful person you had in your office get one by one killed by a serial killer.
It's strangely healing in a way that you don't actually have to kill anyone in your office.
That I can like, but there's also these are teenagers who are just trying to have sex and aren't that smart because they're teenagers, and let's kill them off. And
I would argue that is literally a problem that we as film critics, all of us have been film critics for more than 2 decades, is a problem with every genre. That people don't put enough character into it. Yes. And sometimes you go, but yeah, the explosions were awesome. That's why you go see a Michael Bay movie, says the guy who defends Michael Bay, but understands his characters mostly suck.
But like John Carpenter talked about, like, the problem with Friday the 13th is they totally misunderstood what I was doing with Halloween. Yeah. They're like, oh, that character was slutty, that character did drugs, so let's kill them. He's like, you missed the entire point of the way I was making that film.
It's what I love about one of the many things I love about Ty West's recent film X, which is this unapologetic porn star survives, drives away, and what is she doing on the way off? Does a bump of coke right off her fist, because this is not a chaste character, and he was putting a button on it like, no, she's not the virginal final girl. She is a survivor, and I love that about that movie.
If I went through that, I would need a bump of coke.
I mean, if you got it,
I mean,
it was the 70s again, so it was everywhere. You get it at 7-Eleven, it was fine.
Indeed.
Well, before we finish this episode, I just want to ask you, as much as you can talk about this, and I don't mean like stuff that's on the plate, what's your dream project you'd love to be attached to?
Dream project.
Like, is there something you're like, man, if I could do something, even if it's like something like this, it doesn't have to be like an IP that exists, but like,
I guess the honest dream thing is what one of the things me and Scott are working towards is adapting some of my books.
Oh,
and seeing them
nice.
as we would love to see Day Zero and Sea of Rust as movies.
So you'd rather do that than Dreams and Shadows and.
I mean, right now, yeah. I do. The thing is Dreams and Shadows was me. I love that series. I love those characters.
Mm-hmm.
But that was me kind of remixing, playing in a genre. Whereas Sea of Rust was me making its own subgenre that didn't exist yet. Like,
Sure.
there aren't books that are just robots.
Yeah.
We have movies about the robot revolution. We have books about the robot revolution, but humans always win in the end.
Yeah.
What if we tell those stories where they don't win?
Mhm.
And what does that mean? And what does that mean when you're in the revolution? What does that mean after the revolution?
Yeah.
And I would love to do something like that because those are stories we've not seen on
Would
shore.
you want to do it animated?
Yeah, I could.
Yeah.
But I would love to do it.
I'd like to see it with
cinematically.
live action.
Okay.
So it can be brought to people, like they could actually realize it.
And I love practical effects so much that the idea of doing practical puppetry with robots would be rad. There's so many, and you've got so many things that Boston Dynamics has been working out. I know because everybody sends me their links every time going, we're about to die, aren't we? You're the expert.
I've already got your theme song.
Honestly,
Seriously.
what you wrote there was so comprehensive. I was like, I could totally see this happening, and not just oh yeah, I could see it. It's like, man, he broke this down in a way where it feels like, like in 3 years, this whole thing.
Which is why the theme song I have is so perfect. It goes like this. In the not too distant future.
Next Sunday AD.
Yeah, sure.
That'd be
Why
a great
not?
lyric.
Yeah, I don't know. But do you ever want to direct?
No.
No.
I was offered a chance. Somebody came to me with money and said, you can do whatever you want with this budget. And I talked to Scott about it. And Scott was just like, Cargill, if you want to direct anything, I'll produce anything you direct. But I don't think you want to direct. You want to sit in your house. You don't want to spend a year working on one thing. You want to spend a year working on 6 things. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And he's like, and you love your wife too much. You just want to hang out with your wife at your house and write.
She's
and
amazing.
Like, that is exactly what I want to do. So, So, who knows? I won't say never, but I do know that if I do it, it won't be till later in life when I've been like, hey, I've pretty much done everything that I set out to do. Let me try something else and fuck around and see if this works out.
And I have a feeling you're going to do everything you set out to do the way things have been going. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Can be happier for you.
Our friend C. Robert Cargill, we're so proud of him. So proud of him. But you can stick around for a very short bonus video that if you're a subscriber at oneofus.net, you can watch where I'm going to put him just like his nose to the grindstone and be like, what are your favorite horror movies, period?
Let's do
Let's
it.
talk about it. So if you're a subscriber, brown coat level or above, you can watch that video. But in the meantime, I'm Chris from oneofus.net.
I'm Martin Thomas. You can catch me at Double Toasted.
And this is C. Robert Cargill, who's just pretty much everywhere now.
I'm in your room now. That was a lot of fun. I no bullshit, guys. My favorite interview I've done over this whole thing.
Oh, that's
like,
great.
It's so much fun. It's why I was like, I knew I was going to have fun doing this because